It's terrifying how easy it is for us women to be fooled, to trust someone who seems kind and loving and caring, only to then discover that they were wearing a mask this entire time. And when that mask ends up slipping, it reveals something truly dangerous. Now, Dr. Gwen, as a forensic psychotherapist, you've worked with some of the most manipulative, violent men on earth. And you've said evil can look like us. So what traits should we start to look out for? The ones that feel safe, but are anything but.
So I like to think of it as being like a bicycle lock. It's not like one thing stands out. If you're going to be in danger from somebody, often a number of risk factors will have to line up in order for the violence to unleash itself. And some of those risk factors are very general ones, which you can't avoid. So, for example, being young and male is a risk factor for violence, but it's not very helpful. So other risk factors that are important to look out for are people who've come from a very disturbed family background. So men who've experienced physical abuse and neglect as children. So men who are not in contact with their family of origin. If they tell you they've broken off all contact with their family, you kind of want to know why that is. So I would suggest can sometimes be not on its own, but in combination with other things. A history of childhood abuse and neglect could be a risk factor to make you a bit wary if you've met someone. Anybody who's got a substance misuse problem, anybody who's addicted to anything, alcohol, cocaine, amphetamines, any kind of addiction substantially increases your risk of acting violently. So if you meet a man who's got a substance misuse problem, you need to step away from him until he's sober and clean. And then the other thing you really need to look out for is a past history of violence. Anybody who's done time for violence is somebody who, without wishing to be judgy about it, you have to be a bit wary about. And particularly if they've got no family relationships, no friends, they've got serious addiction problem, and if they've been convicted of acts of violence in the past, particularly towards partners, then that's a row of risk factors, which for me would make me worried that these are pretty risky. The last number in the bicycle lock that might unleash that violence is some kind of conflict between you and him. The first time you have a big row about something, the first time you have a fight, how people do emotional conflict is really important. So someone who gets very angry very quickly, again, is somebody, if they've got these other risk factors, you might want to back away from.
By the end of this episode, I want people to actually have the signs and the skills and build the skill set in order for them to be able to identify them. So I'd like to now talk about something you talk in your book called False Mask of Normalcy. And you have actually a quote by W.H. Auden that hit me so much to the core that I think this is the problem that a lot of my community really struggle with. Evil is unspectacular and always human. It shares our bed and eats at our tables. Now, when we talk about the false mask of normalcy, I think that this is one of the biggest traps us women face, is that they seem normal to us at first.
It's something that all psychiatrists and psychologists struggle with, which is the question of what is normal. And what is normal is not just a feature of who you are individually, but also how you relate to other people socially. And a lot of these kind of personality disorders that we're talking about that you just mentioned, like psychopathy and narcissistic disorders, are really disorders of the social mind, the ability to interact healthily with other people. But because people want to try and fit in with other people, sometimes there can be, like, as you say, a kind of mask. And in fact, one of the most famous books about psychopathy was called The Mask of Sanity. And it was by a guy called Hervey Cleckley, and published first in 1941. And he was arguing these are people who look quite normal and behave quite normally in most situations, but seem to be curiously unempathic. And what Cleckley said was they seemed to know the words, but not the music. Superficially, they seem quite normal, but actually their connections with other people are shallow. If you're with somebody who is constantly changing, where you're never quite sure what kind of mood or mental state they're going to be in, then that's a huge red flag in itself. And one of the things I would say to people is just check yourself. That little bit of you that's very quick to trust somebody, even though you don't know them very well. Just think, have I really heard or seen enough to trust a person completely? I mean, it takes time to get to know other people. One of the things about us as human beings is actually we can't read each other's minds. We can barely read each other's faces, but we need to make sure that we are looking after ourselves. And looking after ourselves means being appropriately cautious about people you don't know.
I find that extremely empowering. The thing I always say is no one gets to take my power away. No one gets to take my voice away. And that's why I'm really obsessed with talking about signs and things that we miss so that I can learn. Like, I'm building a tool belt, if you will, Dr. Gwen, of all the things that I have missed over the years, of all the signs that I didn't see coming, so that I can eventually start to assess who is wearing a mask of normalcy. And you've had so much experience. And so going into your world, again, reading your book and pulling out things that you've said in interviews, I actually have a bit of a list that I'd love to go through if you're okay with it. So it's 11 red flags that actually reveal who's behind the mask. So the first one that I have is they make you feel crazy for having normal emotions.
I'm going to say something which may sound really radical, but also, and maybe a little uncomfortable, which is we do need to take responsibility for our emotions and feelings and thoughts. If we have feelings that are uncomfortable or unpleasant, I think it's important to ask ourselves, why am I having this feeling now? Instead of saying to this person, you made me feel this, I would be asking myself, what is it about this guy that is making me feel this? And I just need to just stop and ask myself, what is it? Is it something about the way he's looking at me? Is it something the way he's talking about other people? I had a friend who went on a date that could have gone really, really badly. And she asked me afterwards she told me the story. It was a horrible story. So she met a nice guy on whatever it was, can't remember which one it was, but she met a nice guy, and they had a telephone call and they arranged to meet for dinner, and they sat down, they had a nice dinner, and then they went back to his apartment, and they both had quite a lot to drink, and then he made a move on her, but then there was something about it that just wasn't landing for her. She felt a bit uncomfortable, she just wanted to leave, and then he was quite unpleasant when she wanted to leave, and he didn't physically stop her, but he was verbally quite unpleasant and a bit intimidating. And she left, and she locked herself in the loo and called an Uber and then got out of there. And I am confident, Lisa, that in your community, there are 1,000 women who have a story to tell like that. And hindsight's 2020, right? So when she was telling me the story and she said to me what you just said, what did I miss? And I said, well, darling, I don't know that you miss anything, but there is one thing you've told me that would have been a bit of a red flag for me, which is this guy was rude to the waitress, and he was rude about previous partners. He spoke about previous partners in a disrespectful, dismissive way. And this was on a first date. And I think that somebody who is rude about third parties when you don't know each other very well, I think that's a bit of a red flag, because what kind of person thinks being rude to a waitress is going to impress you as a woman? So I think one of the things that's really important for us as women to look out for is those men whose whole language and behavior seems to communicate a kind of contempt for people who are vulnerable, who have less money, who have less status, and who assume that you will share their views. Because, this guy, he didn't know whether she would agree with him or not, but he didn't bother to check out. He didn't bother to check out whether she was the sort of person who might be impressed by dissing the waitress. And if they're not interested in what you think, why are they on a date with you?
All right, guys, we'll be right back with Dr. Gwen Adshead. But for 1 second, are you struggling to build your confidence, to set boundaries and stand up for yourself, to feel like you have a freaking voice? Then smash the subscribe button down there so you can get notified every single time an episode comes out. You're not alone, and we're here to build our confidence together. So smash that subscribe button, get the notifications. Now, let's get back to the episode.
And you said something really interesting, which is about, again, what I've missed, times when maybe we got things wrong, people have betrayed us, what did I miss? And I think time is a factor. What I often hear, particularly in the family courts where I work, and I see women who've got into trouble with very difficult relationships, is that they've trusted, they've assumed that this person is the guy for them after literally only meeting them a couple of times. And they could say, oh, well, he seemed really nice when I met him. And I'm thinking, yeah, but you only met him a couple of times. How do you know anything about anybody if you've only met them a couple of times? And I have to tell you, the people say, oh, I just knew. I just know. I think, you didn't. You really didn't. Nobody does. Nobody does. I haven't met very many perpetrators of violence who kind of set out to kind of con and manipulate other people. But I think it is true that they are often men who are interested in dominating the vulnerable. And so they are interested in seeking out vulnerable women. And vulnerable women can be vulnerable in lots of different ways. But the ways that we're vulnerable are often to do with unmet psychological needs, from childhood or adulthood, unresolved psychological traumas. And we can have kind of rescue fantasies that, somebody will come along and they'll be my perfect person and and everything will be fine when they and I connect. But everything we know about human relationships says that this isn't how it works. Actually, you have to kiss a lot of frogs. And we need to be careful that the frogs aren't poisonous.
Yeah. Oh my God, Doctor, that was just number one. Oh my God,
that's just number one. So we've got another 10 to go.
No, honestly, I love your insights. They're so powerful, and you're really speaking the language of us women so that we can hear it and really take it in so that we can assess and change the way that we act in future. Like, it's so powerful. So thank you. So number two, we've got they're overly charming, and there are women that want that. And so I'm going to use myself as an example. When I met my husband, he was extremely charming. He was extremely charismatic. And he showed love and affection and kindness, and I loved it. And so I somewhat gave myself over to it. And when it is with a pure, good man, it can be uplifting. He was the one that encouraged me to seek my own life, to seek my own joy. The problem is if you do that with, like you said, a poisonous frog. That poisonous frog is going to see it as the best opportunity to manipulate you because you've given yourself over. So you have the natural inclination of what a lot of women want, to be loved, to feel safe, to be wrapped in a man's arms. Again, I'm not saying that's everybody, but that's somewhat a lot of women that I know. But depending on if the man is charming authentically or if the man is charming for nefarious reasons, can make or break you as a woman.
I think because we're social animals, we all try to be charming when we meet people for the first time. It's nobody sets out in a new meeting with a person you don't know to not be charming. So charm is something that should never be given great weight to when you meet somebody. But what's interesting is the kind of charm that's being used, whether it's a kind of charm which is look after me, I'm vulnerable, or whether it's the kind of charm which is I'm strong, let me look after you. But I think what you really want to get to know over the course of time is this person interested in you as a person or in what they want you to be? But similarly, are you interested in them? Because sometimes the problems come when you think, oh, we're exactly alike, we should get together. But sometimes some differences are really important in a relationship. And that's what I meant about this story, my poor friend Susan, was that this guy wasn't really interested in her at all. He wasn't really interested in what she had to say or what she thought. And because she was a nice woman who'd been brought up to be pleasing, she had quite a dominating father. And she grew up in a household where there was quite an expectation that, when daddy says jump, you say how high. And in the other side of that, though, Lisa, is that many of these men who do turn out to be cruel and controlling are men who have serious unresolved issues with their own mothers, who have often been very frightened of their mothers. And then they go into relationships determined not to be the vulnerable ones.
Wow. Okay, so we've got number 3. They shut down conversations when they get too real.
So what we're describing here is avoidance. Some people manage distress either by avoiding it completely or kind of getting caught up in it, like a kind of vortex in which they go round and round and round and round and round and round, but they don't kind of solve it. But the people who are avoiding it also don't solve their distress, but they avoid it instead. And there are lots of ways you can avoid distress. The commonest one is drinking or taking drugs. But you can also, as you say, oh, that's stupid, I don't want to talk about that. Or you can actually get angry and walk out. And I think the first thing to say is that if somebody does that, there is a good chance that they are in pain. Okay, they're being a bit of a dick about it. But there's a good chance that they are in pain. So it's worth just taking some time out and checking with this person when they're calm enough to say, can we just talk about what happened? Can we just talk about what it is that you heard me say and what it is that you felt that made you walk out? Because I need to understand this. I'm not saying it's okay, but if we're going to move on from this, I need to understand what happened. And if he says, well, you said this and that made me feel this, and you can say, well, now just walk me through it. What is it that you were feeling? And a lot of the time, if men are storming out angrily or are kind of switching off, the chances are that something is they're feeling a bit vulnerable, but they don't like feeling vulnerable. So that's something that's worth exploring. And then, of course, the other thing you need to explore is this man interested in understanding it? Because many men who are violent often will use the stereotype of the nagging wife or the nagging partner to justify how there was a row and then they lost it and they, hit her. I'm really sorry. She was just nagging me all the time about money. So it means establishing lines of communication. And if a man walks out every time you want to have communication, then he's not really interested in having the kind of relationship that you need. So I studied attachment theory because I was particularly interested in the way that attachment is manifested in people's language. And the way people talk, not just the content of what they speak. Yeah, attachment theory is a big theory for me that I take very seriously, very influential in the way I see things. And in fact, attachment insecurity is commoner in perpetrators of violence than it is in the general population by a factor of about 4. So that's not saying that attachment insecurity causes you to be violent. But if you remember what I was talking about, a bicycle lock earlier on, that maybe attachment insecurity may be a risk factor for violence because your attachment style has such a strong influence on how you manage feelings and emotions and distress and how you kind of form bonds of trust with other people.
Wow, for someone that this is the first time they've ever heard about attachment theory, do you mind just taking a few minutes just to break down each one and give us a very quick synopsis of them?
No, absolutely. The attachment system in human beings is a kind of biopsychosocial kind of system which enables us to make relationships with other people when we're feeling vulnerable. So if you have a secure attachment system, that means that when you're distressed, you reach out to other people, you expect to be cared for, you learn how to soothe yourself. And it doesn't mean that you never feel upset, but rather, if you do feel upset, you know how to get your emotional needs met, but you also know how to look after your own emotional needs. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have an insecure attachment system, there are 3 or 4 different kinds of attachment insecurity that are important to think about. So one we've already touched on, which is avoidant attachment. And when you're in that state of mind, you just tune out from distress. You say, oh, it doesn't matter. I'm fine. I'm strong. I'm normal. I don't need any help. Thank you very much. And I see quite a lot of those guys in prisons. And I'm fine. I'm fine. And then there are the people who kind of get preoccupied with their distress. So, but the trouble is that they're so enmeshed in it. They kind of, I want help, I don't want help, I want help, I don't want help, I like this person, I don't like this person. They kind of oscillate. They rapidly oscillate between getting close, pulling away, getting close, pulling away, because you're both approach and you withdraw. And then there's a kind which is called fearful attachment, which is just what it says on the tin, really, which is that you're fearful of making attachments. And that's often because you've been exposed to some serious fear when you were little.
Yeah. So as women, we should work towards becoming a secure attachment so that we are building up the armor to protect us.
Well, and I certainly think it's very important that we don't give away our agency and our autonomy for managing our own emotions. If we expect our male partners to manage our distressing emotions for us, then that is giving them power. And do you know why? What's interesting about it is because it replicates what happens between parents and children. Because children naturally expect their parents to help them handle their emotions. Because that's what parents do. If we give people that power and that agency, there's a cost to that. There's a cost to that, or potentially. And that might be okay until something changes. And I tell you, the thing that changes most commonly that causes domestic violence is getting pregnant. Because a third of domestic violence starts in pregnancy. And that's because the arrival of a third person, even in utero, changes the dynamic.
But I wouldn't have expected, I mean, I somewhat wouldn't have been surprised if you said once the baby was born, like within the first year of a child's birth. But what is it then about the pregnancy in and of itself that will trigger or activate that toxic behavior?
Because it's to do with attachment. Because when you transition into parenthood, you get in touch with your vulnerability of being a child again. Because in the transition to parenthood, where do you go in your mind? You go in your own mind to your memories of being a little boy or a little girl, your own memories of your parent. So the transition to parenthood, motherhood or fatherhood, activates your attachment system. And if your attachment system is an insecure one, then what you've got sometimes is 2 people who are feeling very insecure now this baby is on the way. And people who are feeling insecure with each other are less able to regulate their emotions. They may start to have conflicts that they didn't have before. And then, of course, but you're absolutely right, Lisa, once the baby arrives, then that adds a whole new level of reality to it, because now the woman isn't entirely focused on the baby. And for a man who's been neglected or rejected as a child himself, he may or may not take that very well. And although there might be a little part of him that knows perfectly well that he's being irrational, there's another part of him that may be so overwhelmed that he starts to get angry. And that can be risky, seriously risky. So we know that a lot of domestic violence, a third domestic violence, starts in pregnancy because the dynamic changes between the man and the woman.
Wow. That's heartbreaking.
It is.
As always, thank you for being honest, because I think that just informs us more. Coming up.
Bear in mind that the more negative judgments we make about other people's states of mind, the more angry we're going to get with them.
Okay, so another sign is they show no real remorse. And you talk about in your book a guy called Marcus.
Grown-ups take responsibility for their emotions. Grown-ups don't say, you made me do this, you made me feel that. And in fact, Marcus and all the men that I work with, it's not so much that they lack remorse, is that they're reluctant to do is take responsibility for the horrible feelings that they had and the horrible actions that they took. Most of my job is about helping these men accept both their horrible emotions and the horrible things that they did. Taking responsibility for your own state of mind is absolutely crucial.
Yeah. All right, we've got number 5. They make you feel responsible for their emotions. I think we somewhat covered that.
We talked about that earlier on, because that is a childlike state of mind. The moment you say you're responsible for my emotions, you're taking up a child role and you're putting them into parent role.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we've got number 6. They don't care how you feel.
Well, if you have a strong sense that this person is not listening to what you say, it depends on how you're making that judgment. But bear in mind that the more negative judgments we make about other people's states of mind, the more angry we're going to get with them. So, for example, if we are constantly rehearsing, you make me feel bad, you don't care about me, he's not listening to me, he doesn't care about me, he just wants to make me feel bad. The more you rehearse those things, even if they're true, the more you are going to feel angry and victimized and pissed off and miserable. It's a good idea to kind of shift to, I'm feeling this. I'm feeling that he's really not listening. I'm feeling that he doesn't care. And if I'm feeling that, what does that say about where I am in this relationship and how it's working for me? Maybe I'm feeling that this is a relationship that doesn't have a future. If I really feel he doesn't care about me, and then you can ask yourself, and do I care about him?
Or just to say, I really do care about him, but he clearly doesn't care about me. Do I want to be in a relationship where it's only one-sided?
Where it's only one-sided. And relationships are living things, so they can change. You're reminding me of another friend of mine who was in a very happy relationship, which lasted a good 20-odd years until he got sick. And he hated being sick. It made him feel less of a man. He put on a lot of weight because he couldn't exercise the way he used to, and he was miserable. But, and this is the big but, he started to express his misery by being mean to his partner of 30-odd years. And she left him because he was really mean and belittling. And she's a smart, thoughtful person. She said, you know what, Tim? This isn't working anymore. I'm heartbroken, but I'm going to leave you because you can't talk to me in that way. And you can't talk to me in the loving way you used to. And I'm not going to stay here. It's really sad. I'm desperately sad, but I'm saying goodbye.
Wow, that's so heartbreaking. But to your point of it can evolve and change. And so to never kind of think that you're good to go and you're done. Who was the story? Oh, God. He would worked on the train stations and the railroads, and he had a pole go through his entire head.
Phineas Gage.
Phineas Gage, thank you. So
yeah.
That's the story of Phineas Gage, where he's working on the railroads, a pole literally, it goes through his entire head.
Yeah.
And he miraculously survives, but ends up being a completely different human after that day.
Yes, and they said of him, he was no longer Gage. His personality changed, and he had very bad temper. He had poor emotion regulation, and he used to swear a lot, which he had never done before. And I think that's a beautiful example of what we're talking about, is that sometimes people can change because of all sorts of events that take place. Sometimes a bereavement will change people. Sometimes, obviously, being made redundant, that's horrible. So when you come back to that question, he doesn't care about me, I think the way to be more effective is to say, well, what do I care about him? What do I care about? What matters to me? What am I feeling right now?
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so I've got, they break a lot of rules.
Oh, yes. People who are regular rule breakers might be the kind of people who are more likely to be ready to break other social rules. So that's why I always advise care, and especially if there's issues around addiction as well.
Yeah, the two combined. So you actually mentioned this earlier, and I wanted you to elaborate a little more. So I've got, they know the words, but not the music. Yeah. So you said that earlier. What does that actually look like in practice?
It's that feeling of glibness, you know, and it's quite hard. It's quite hard to define, because it's something about feeling that somebody is being sincere with you. Now, you can say, well, surely people can fake sincerity. Yeah, there's that lovely quote from a song, but always be sincere, whether you mean it or not.
I've heard that before. That's really good.
Yeah, Flanders and Swan from the 1960s. Always be sincere, whether you mean it or not. So I think human beings do have a capacity to kind of have a sense when somebody's not really being authentic.
Actually, didn't I hear you in an interview say that, I can't remember who you were with, but it was somebody who was in prison, and you had talked about the consequences, and they're like, oh, I never even considered the consequences.
That's right. A lot of people who act violently don't think about the consequences. And that's because they're kind of expressing their emotions through their violent actions. They're not thinking through what's going to happen next. And a lot of the therapy that we do with violence perpetrators is about helping them think more about, well, if you do this, how do you think that other person's going to feel? What do you think is going to happen?
I wasn't sure, actually, if part of it also was with, if you're specifically, I guess, a grandiose narcissist, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because this was just my assumption, is that you just have so much audacity, you don't even think about getting caught because you're like, I'm so good, I wouldn't get caught.
Yes, I think there are a small percentage of violence perpetrators, particularly with who score highly on psychopathy, who also score highly on pathological narcissism, and it is grandiose narcissism. There are two kinds of narcissism. There's vulnerable narcissism and grandiose narcissism. And it's that grandiose narcissism combined with rule breaking and substance misuse, which is often particularly associated with serious violence. So yes, I think the grandiosity goes to that kind of non-appreciation of consequences. I think that's true.
Yeah, I mean, the Diddy trials are about to come up, and I've been doing a lot of research and going into how has this only just come about now? If this started 30, 40 years ago with fame and his power and his money, how are we only finding out now? How did he only just get arrested now? And a lot of the experts that I've spoken to, they're just like, he just thought he was above it all. Some of these guys just have so much, again, the word that comes to mind is audacity of power. They have so much glibness, they don't think they'll ever get caught.
I do find myself wondering whether if you become very successful and you acquire a lot of money and a lot of power, and you're surrounded by people who tell you that you are absolutely marvelous all the time and who do your bidding and who give you license to be rude to them and never challenge you. And you get into a kind of, for want of a better phrase, a kind of dominance inferiority relationship, these kind of strict dominance hierarchies. They can work if people are agreeing that people's individual respect never goes away. But if you actually come to believe that you are superior to the person who is mowing your lawn, then you have a serious problem.
It's fascinating. Okay, so they speak in absolutes, no flexibility.
Yes. Well, this kind of rigidity of thought, and this goes for both victims and perpetrators, I'm afraid. I think that it's very, very important when we're protecting ourselves to try to hold on to the idea that there may be things that we don't know. Because often rigidity of thought, so no, he would never hurt me. He would never hurt the children. I know him. But actually, we have to ask ourselves, is it possible that I could be mistaken? what if I got this wrong? What if I'm reading this wrong? And I think one of the things for us sometimes as women is, again, that we pride ourselves on being empathic about reading people accurately, but we can never read people completely accurately. It's just not possible. We are opaque to each other. We don't know what's going on behind somebody's face. And we always have to have that little bit of caution. And that's why rigidity of thought can be an activator for some kinds of violence. But it can also stop people from taking the steps they need to protect themselves.
Wow, I never expected you to answer like that. And you're so right. As you were talking, it reminded me, I just very recently did an interview with an FBI profiler. And one of the stories he was telling me is this guy was married and he ends up killing three of his wives. One, she accidentally fell off the cliff, but really he pushed her. She, oh my God, did an overdose. Really, he drugged her. He confesses all three. And sitting next to him is his fourth wife. And she turns around and she's holding his hand and she's like, but he'll never do it to me.
Yeah.
And so when I even asked this question about the flag, I thought you were very much going to go to the offender, but you're so right, is that if that actually becomes a danger to us in us having the absolutes of it. Ooh.
Yeah.
Never expected that, you're right. Okay, so we've got number 10, no emotional depth to their personality.
Emotional depth is about realizing that there's lots we don't know about both our own minds and the minds of others. And I think people who have real emotional depth are always questioning themselves. They're reflecting on themselves. What's going on here? As opposed to saying, well, I love you. And that's just it. I just love you. Well, how do you love me? Show me that you love me. Well, I just love you. It's obvious.
That's so true. And going back to my relationship with my husband, it's like, it's one thing to say it, it's a whole other thing to feel it. And so even if I tell my husband every single day I love him, if he doesn't feel it, I have to sit with him and we have to communicate what it is that he needs to feel loved. And then when he lays that out, I tell myself, am I willing to do that? Yes or no? And then we basically articulate it. But to your point, if you just hammer on, I said this, therefore you should just accept it, is definitely a sign of no emotional depth.
One other thing that I wish I'd learned much earlier on is that you can love someone without liking them. You see what I mean? That loving someone doesn't mean that you never feel cross with them or that you sometimes get frustrated with them or maddened by them. But really loving someone means that you can do conflict successfully.
Yeah. Okay, and then the last one they've got is they create false victimhood to gain sympathy.
I think one of the big challenges of the 21st century is how we understand the experience of being a victim, and that we need to make sure that we don't idealize victimhood and use it as an excuse. And somebody was asking me about the Menendez brothers today. And anybody who's familiar with the Netflix documentary will know that the Menendez brothers claimed that they were abused by their parents.
Yeah.
And that was why they killed them. But, and that was explored at the trial. But being victimized has never been an excuse for violence. And it can't ever be. It may be an explanation. It may provide us with an understanding, an important understanding, but it can't be an excuse. So what I see in my world are people who do construct kind of stories of being victims in order to gain sympathy. Whereas what they really are often are very angry people who need to let go of their anger. And I think one of the big challenges for us as women is sometimes we kind of assume a victim status when really what we want is to get very angry with somebody.
Yeah. All right. Oh my God, you're so amazing. You've been such an expert for years and years and decades. You have worked in hospitals, you've worked in prison hospitals where you've really seen the truth of what's behind what we call evil and the minds and the realities of these humans. And I've heard many of your stories where you're talking to somebody, maybe they're a murderer and they show a sign, and you've always had to stay neutral. I think the skill of being able to stay neutral when in the presence of a narcissist or psychopath is such a unique skill that I hope so many of us women can learn. Because if we're able to learn it, we can keep our cool, we can stay emotionally sober is the word that I like to use, in order to be able to not give our power away and come away from that conversation feeling like we've still got our pride intact. And so I feel like you are absolutely the master at doing this. So I've got a list that I've called How to Talk to a Psychopath. And number one is staying emotionally distant. Talk to me about how on earth you're able to internally keep your boundaries to protect your own emotional wounds so that they don't get triggered by somebody extremely dangerous.
Well, there are two things here that I think are important to mention. One is, I think we have to remember that I'm there as a therapist. It's not about me. So I trying all the time not to personally engage. And I have some choice about that. And not taking things personally is something I wished I learned a lot earlier on in my career, that actually I have some choice over whether I take things personally. And that if a man were to be, it doesn't happen very often, but if people are kind of abusive or rude or unpleasant, then I have some choice about whether or not to take it personally.
Can you take me, assume you're in real time now? Because I hear the message of don't take it personally, but there's a very big difference of going, okay, I won't take it personally, versus just sitting in front of someone, they say something and become triggered.
Well, I take a deep breath. And I think, what am I feeling now? And what did this person just say? What am I feeling now? And what is this about? And is this something that I have to react to? And if I don't have to react to it, then I don't. And is this something that I have to respond to? Then I don't. I'm always checking myself. So for me, it's about building up a self-reflective skill, but just take a breath, take a beat, take a pause. What am I thinking here? Do I have to engage? Do I have to say anything? Sometimes silence is very, very effective.
As a woman, when I have an emotional reaction, it doesn't mean that I don't feel it. But sometimes after the fact, I walk away and I do wish that I'd handled it differently. I do wish that I had stayed calmer. And especially when you're engaging with a narcissist, they can absolutely use that emotional reaction as a weapon. And so I'm always trying to think about what skills as women can we learn so that things aren't used against us. Okay, so you also say you keep questions neutral.
Yes. Well, I keep the tone of my voice neutral, but also warm. And that's often the thing that's really most important. So I'm conveying a kind of warmth, I'm conveying a kind of interest, but I'm not showing too much interest. And especially, I have no role in either condemning people or in cheering them up. It's not unusual for me when I'm running groups with people who've killed, for example, to say, well, everyone in this room has done something horrible and that's why we're here. But I say it in that kind of tone. So it's kind of matter of fact, kind of warm, kind of ordinary, but it's real and it's true. And that just helps to ground everybody, including myself.
There's no judgment as well, the way you said it.
No judgment. If you're introducing judgment, then you're back into introducing this hierarchy in which I'm looking down on you and judging you. And I'm not going to be able to establish any kind of working rapport with anybody if they feel that I'm dissing them or belittling them. That's not what I'm there for.
Yeah.
That's not what gives me satisfaction in my work.
And then the last one I've got is you protect your sense of reality. And that's one thing that I hear a lot from a lot of my community when they find themselves in a spider's web, if you will, is that they don't know which way is up or down. They don't know what's real, what they're telling them, if it's accurate.
People lie all the time for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes good reasons, sometimes bad reasons, sometimes a mixture of good and bad reasons. but I don't have to have an investment in what they're saying to me. What they're saying to me is important to understand how they see the world, but it's not necessarily going to determine how I see the world. I'm just doing a case at the moment with a woman, a very sad case of a woman who's hurt her child. And she absolutely denies it. She absolutely denies it. And when I interviewed her, she told me all sorts of stuff that was utter nonsense, and I knew was utter nonsense. But I didn't call her out on it because that's not where I'm at. I just noticed that she was still telling me a story which she thought was convincing. It's convincing for herself, but it's not convincing for me. So I think for me is something here about agency and autonomy. I know it's hard when you've got a big emotional attachment to somebody, but if you really feel like what is happening between you and this person is incoherent and it's not making sense, then it's probably important to trust that feeling and go and find somebody to explore it with.
Dr. Gwen, this has been so amazing. I'm so bummed that we couldn't do this in person, but you live in England. Your book, The Devil You Know, was so fantastic. The work you do is really helping so many people. Where can people go and find you and follow you if they want to know more?
The book is on Amazon.com in the usual way. The lectures that I gave on the BBC last October, they're on the BBC website. Find my lectures on YouTube and go into Google Scholar and find the things that I've written. I'm there to be found.
Guys, honestly, every single time I bring on a guest, it is for them to bring value to you so that you never feel like you ever have to diminish yourself, that you can always show up confident, so that you can stand up for yourself and be the woman that you truly have always wanted to be. You just haven't been taught the skill sets that is needed to do that. And so today with Dr. Gwen, I really hope you guys have learned the nuggets that you can put in your tool belt so that you can keep showing up damn confident and never let anybody take your power away again. So guys, go follow her. If you're not following me, follow me at Lisa Bilyeu. And if you're not subscribed, smash that subscribe button down there. And until next time, be the hero of your own life. Peace. If you've ever been manipulated, gaslit, or just want to protect yourself from toxic people, then watch this and learn the checklist that will unmask who he really is.
Everything looked great on the surface, but something felt off. Something didn't feel right. And they don't even know that they're dealing with a psychopath.